Shirley Adams for the Sewing Connection, Series 16, Program 11. A basic neckline is high, rounded, and the standard from which any other neckline can be developed. These changes are not high-tech or in any way complicated. Everyone can successfully create new looks, but let's first check the comfort of the starting point, and then we can open it up and change shaping for whatever flattering effect you want. Now, what's comfortable about a neckline is when it is no higher than right here. There's a little hollow spot right at the base of your neck, and anything above that you feel like you're choking and you can't tolerate it. And so anytime something feels uncomfortable, this is why. It's just built too high for you. And sometimes this is true of ready-to-wear. Sometimes it certainly is true of patterns, and you have to cut them down because they aren't all exactly the same. And so be aware of that. Just remember that little hollow spot right here, and that's probably your tolerance place. Now, sometimes it's easiest to find that by just putting a little fine chain, a jewelry chain around your neck, and make it longer or shorter to decide exactly where your neckline should be. And when it's like that, then measure that neckline to see what it is, measure that chain, and then measure your pattern to see if it conforms with that, the stitching line of your pattern, not the cutting line. And maybe you'll find out what your problem was, because some of us have longer, narrower necks, others have wider, shorter ones. So it really is affected by that. Now, not so much in back is it affected, because there are not several planes in back. As your back curves up, it just keeps on going into your neckline. But what happens in the side, of course, your shoulders come in and your neck goes up. In front, your chest comes in and your neck is a different plane as it goes out. So it's the front mainly that's the big problem. And it might be somewhat affected on the sides if you have a wider base of your neck, but it's rarely affected in back. So anyway, knowing that, then we can go ahead and change some necklines. Now, what I have here is just the basic. And remember a few programs ago, we were doing darts. So this is from my corrected basic. It fits me now. I've changed whatever I need to do to alter it, and now it fits. So this has simply been traced off on a lot of other papers so that we can do a few changes. Now, when you're going to do these changes, of course, we better have some measuring device. So I'm going to get out a measuring tape. And we might need a little tape, so I'll get that out. I love having the space for all these tools at hand. In the top drawer that I have here on this table that I designed, I was telling you about that several programs ago. If you design something to your specifications, you know it's going to work for you. And I found this invaluable. But I have all my cutting and marking tools here that I'll need on this work table, because so much of the work you do on a table here. And it's going to be any pattern work. It's certainly going to be any cutting out work. Very often, instead of using the ironing board, I'm going to use this and just put a space board on it, my ironing pad there. I have my paper supply here whenever I need it, and some glue and so on. So everything's close here at hand. Under the leaves, now there are big leaves that come up here, and under each of those leaves there are 4 spaces provided by the leaves that come up, and that means you can put chests under them, or maybe whatever other equipment you need. Since I use that pressing pad here on top a lot, there's another drawer on the other side of the table where I have all my pressing equipment, the hams and the rolls and all those things that I need. So it's just something I really find very pleasurable to work with in the sewing room. But anyway, now that I have my measuring tools out, let's think what you can do if that neckline is too high for you on that commercial pattern. It's as simple as, I said it wasn't high tech, it's as simple as just measuring, how much too high is that pattern? For instance, you measure that you have a 14-inch neckline, and you measure the pattern and find out it's a 13.5. Well, no wonder it doesn't feel good. It comes up too high and it feels like you're choking. If you just put a finger here above that soft part at the base of your neck, you'll feel like you're choking. You can't do that. And so you just decide, what does it need to come down? A 1/2 inch? Or a 1/4 inch, whatever it is. A little bit can make a big difference in the way it feels on you. Something that also is really very helpful is if you have a few of these little devices. Maybe it's going to be this curve stick. This one has both a neckline in it. You can just find a good curve there for a neckline, and you can find these in notions departments, in equipment, in the fabric shops, or maybe in the sewing machine shops. It also can change the arm side, the armhole, if you need to make some changes there. It's nice too, and I have space on the shelves for an L square. If you don't have an L square, you can always just use the square edge of a paper. Yesterday's newspaper might work, but I like to have all the equipment. I like to have it all here, just handy in these shelves and the drawers that are here. Well, anyway, if I want to come down a 1/2 inch, I'll just measure. Whoops, I need to have another little measure here, my little gauge. If I just want to come down here a 1/2 inch, then I would go ahead and measure that and put a little mark there. And once I have that little mark, then I would know that I just need to get some nice little place here that I could bring it down. Now, something else you need to think about when you come to any corners anywhere. If I would put this curve stick on like this, for instance, notice how it's coming down to a point. You always picture what happens on the flip side, because you have the whole thing rounded there. And if it's going to come down to a point, it'll look a little bit like a V-neck then. So right here, it should pretty much be a square in order for it to work out just right. When it comes out here to the edge of the arm's eye, it should pretty much be a square, because if it isn't, right out here at the edge where the sleeve starts, it'll either peek out or it'll sort of cup in. But anyway, that would be a problem. So kind of watch that things are squared around those edges. That's why I sometimes use an L square for that. But anyway, if I want this down just a little bit, then I'll simply find a nice smooth little place to connect. Let's see, where can I get that? Just work around until you find a good place for it. Here's a place where it maybe rounds off pretty nicely. And just make it, and I didn't quite do it, so I'll find another place to smooth it off right here. So it's just that easy. You're just trying to get a smooth, fluid line is the only thing you're trying to do. If you need to widen it, you do the same thing there. Just go ahead and widen it a little bit and find a good place on a curve that you can do that with. And if all else fails, how about the saucer that's under your coffee cup? Just so that you can get some sort of a nice rounded place to use. And if you're going to do this any wider in the front, you would of course have to widen it the same amount in back so that everything does go together. So whatever happens up here has to happen there. Now if you just lower the front, you don't have to lower the back because it isn't affected at all. So just remember what pieces go together and work accordingly. Now you might want to not have this high neckline. You might want to lower it. Maybe it's going to be dressy, or maybe it's going to be for warm weather, and maybe you want to lower it. It's a good idea to stand in front of a mirror when you lower a neckline and actually get some measuring device to decide how much you can lower it, because you are affected by whatever lingerie is there, and so measure from that place down to wherever you want the neckline, however high or low, because if you just draw some arbitrary line, it may or may not turn out to be something that you like. So it's a lot easier to do that. It also might be easy to stand in front of a mirror and hold a piece of yarn, or in this case I have a measuring tape, just to decide, okay, this is how I'd like the neckline, or like this, or however. But anyway, that would give you a good reference point, and then you could measure from wherever your neckline is down to wherever you have that yarn or tape or whatever, and go ahead and make that measurement so that you know exactly where to mark it on here, so that if you wanted to scoop this down into some sort of a lower neckline, and if you come down lower, you very well may come out wider as well. So I'm going to bring this out, about 1.5 inches wider, and just make a neckline that looks like this. Now because this did come out wider, I better check exactly how wide, and I better do the very same thing on the back so that they will go together. And so, okay, if we want that on the front, we'd want that also here on the back. And so I'll just make a little mark here, and it doesn't necessarily have to be lower in back, but usually it is. Usually it's a little bit lower everywhere. Not necessarily. I'll just round it around here in some neat way. Okay, about like this. In order for it not to come up to a peak in back, it looks like I'm going to have to lower it a little bit. So kind of like that. And we'd have it lowered both slightly in back and considerably in front, or however low you want it. You're the designer, so you can take it to all depths. Think about a square neckline. There's another possibility. And if you have a square line, you even more so need to worry about what happens with the lingerie, because coming down to either a V-neck, and of course a V-neck's easily done. You simply put the ruler to wherever you want it and come down to a V. Let's say it's going to be to about here. So that's quite all right. And notice I narrowed it a little bit. I started at the same point here at the top, but I narrowed it a little bit here, which doesn't matter. That would be all right. and come down to a V, or if you want to round it slightly to a V, if you feel that would be a more comfortable line, just go to a rounded spot on this and round it a little bit down to that V. If you're going to, I'm getting a lot of necks here, I better go on to another one. And if you want a square neckline, I started to say, this is where you may have to consider a little bit more even what happens with your lingerie, because remember, you can't come out too terribly square without some other fabric showing there. So you better measure there also and see both how deep it can get as well as how wide it can get. Again, by taking the tape measure and just measuring from one side to the other to see exactly how wide would be right and what would work out just fine for you. So these necklines are easy to change. Think about a boat neckline. And usually a boat neckline comes up even higher than this place in your neck, but it isn't uncomfortable and it doesn't feel confining because it comes out wider on the shoulders, so you can move around. But think about how wide can it be? Are there any straps somewhere? And if so, those straps probably are right about here, right about in the middle of your shoulder. That would mean that this boat neckline, if you would make one, can't come out beyond this. And so you would have to make it just about like this. Now, very often when there's a boat neckline, and I'll just square up the front and make it a little bit higher, but it really doesn't feel that uncomfortable. Very often when there's a boat neckline, how it's made is maybe with a facing, or maybe it's just made like this. Maybe it's just made so that there's a fold under facing at the top and then the shoulders are cut. But it is not going to be very easy to wear unless you make it wider. So what I would do in that case with that kind of a boat neckline, I'd actually, and I could have taken just as easily a ruler or something, I would actually give it more space here at the top, and as I'm doing right now. And then, you know, this is going to be cut on a fold, but anyway, and to cut it on a fold, I'm going to have to change the angle of this paper a little bit so it's straight across here. But by the time I cut the shoulders out, and I would cut the facing out with it, then the facing's cut on and it looks kind of like this. Now this is exaggerated. It really doesn't usually look like this in a pattern. Usually in a pattern they would round this off a little bit so that when you'd see the facing cut on, it would just go in there easily and attach, but not be so exaggerated. What you also might need on any of these necklines would be, wrong drawer, would be a facing. And so a facing is easy as just tracing whatever neckline you have. So I'll go back to this lowered neckline and I'd need a facing on it. Then it's just a matter of being able to see through the paper you use. And so I'd trace this neckline that's here. If this is where my neckline is going to be, like this, then how wide do you want the facing? Probably about, 2.5 inches wide maybe. So here's your facing cut on a fold, the same as the outside dress is. It's that easy to make these changes. But let's look at some models and think of some more exciting changes than these, a little bit more unusual ones perhaps. The first one, this suit I wore last series, and this was just an ordinary suit pattern, but I put that funny little blip on the top at the neck. And that's easy enough to do. Let me show you here on the table that little blip at the neck, and it's just a pattern that looks like this. Here is approximately how it would be. There'd be an extension here for buttons and buttonholes. Here's the center front, but if I'm going to have a button this big, then I'd need an extension at least this big, plus about 1/4 inch that you want to show beyond the edge of the button, plus a seam allowance. So about that much extension I'd have to have, including the cutting line. And so if that's the way I want it to be, then I'd have to bring this way out to here, and I'm going to round the neckline kind of this way. How? About like this. Okay, here was the original neckline on that suit, and then from here it came on down, and this was just nicely rounded. All I did is leave it this way on the left side of the jacket. No, pardon me, on the right side of the jacket, I left it this way. On the left side of the jacket is where I added that funny little blip. And what that is it just comes out like this, and it comes back here to meet. And then I have a button right here. And the reason I did that is because I thought it would be kind of fun for it to button the usual right over left at the lower part of the jacket, but at the top of the jacket it buttons left over right. So it was just a little design thing that I did just as a novelty, and I kind of liked the effect. Another one that we see on the model is this one that is an exaggerated top, and it really crosses over considerably. Well, how you would do something like that is also just take your little curved stick or coffee cup or saucer or whatever you're going to use and sort of smooth it into the neck. And I'm going to come out, measure first to decide exactly how far, but that one's approximately this far. And then it's just after it is rounded there, then it just comes down like this and joins the rest of the front. And as I'm doing this, I'm adding on the extension so that I have it there for buttons and buttonholes. But this is how easy it is to do something like that. And it's a very simple change. Now usually when you do this, the under part that laps under would be done the same way. So you'd simply cut out two thicknesses of this so that you have a right and a left. And there again, just duplicate that for the facing. The facing is always a duplicate. Another one we have that's not very much different is this black vest with the crystal zipper, just a fun little thing. And that is very little difference. And the reason I have it coming down just a little bit, see how it kind of curves down into a little sweetheart neckline there? The reason for that is because of the length of my zipper. Since I had a zipper that didn't come all the way to the top, it wasn't quite long enough. It only came to about here. So I just curved that little bit at the top. It's that simple to do that, to change it a little bit. I did the same thing at the bottom. Now it's lengthened, of course, beyond the waist for that vest, but there also, where the zipper ended, I just curved the bottom around instead of making it a squared off bottom. So simple changes that everybody can do very easily. Let's look at another one. And this is a really plunging neckline. Obviously, you're going to wear something under that suit. And so this blue suit comes all the way down. Now, the reason I have it come all the way to the neck, or to the waistline, is because I wanted to utilize the stripes in that fabric. Instead of having them going straight up and down and being on grain that way, here's how the grain of that suit is. It goes like this. And so all the stripes that are in that suit are parallel with this edge. Therefore, this jacket, the front of it, is a little off grain in that all the stripes are parallel with the front. And then I made it match on the shoulder so that the back is just on grain. It's only the front that's changed. But obviously, if you're trying to get an edge that goes with stripes like that, then it has to be plunging this way, and it has to work out that way. So it's just fun to play with these things and see what happens. And it's fun to think that I can do it, no matter what it is. I can design whatever I want, whatever you see in a magazine. The next one is a purple one, and this is a swing vest, so I added some flair in this. But also, how you make that neckline is something you can do to any blouse, any vest. And what it is simply starting up here at the neckline, or at the neck shoulder point, and look at the model again to see how she can flare that out. See how it goes out just very straight, and it can actually tie over there on the side, or it can just drape down nicely as it hangs in place. But the way that neckline was made is like this. I just came straight out. I came straight up on the shoulder. So you just put something on the shoulder, a ruler, a yardstick there, and I came straight up, probably about 10 inches or so. And then from that point where it came straight up here, then it just curves around and eventually joins. I'll curve it like this. Okay, it curves around here and eventually joins the rest of the front of that vest and just hangs down like this. So it's simply adding this extra. When it is actually tied over here, then it holds out straight. When it's not tied, it just droops down into this cascade ruffle type thing that's down there. So you can do this on a soft fabric, one layer of it, very easily. Another garment that I wanted to show you is very similar to one I already did, except this one doesn't have such curvy shapes. This one's overlapped considerably. But here again, measure on yourself in front of a mirror how much overlap you want to have. And so this one also just extends out from the center front, probably about this far, but then I took it straight down instead of curving back in as a lapel would do. Now, if you do have a lapel, for instance, on a suit, a standard suit would look about like this. Here's the center front. We, of course, need the extension for the buttons and so on. But then if this is the extension for the buttons and also the seam allowance, usually the standard suit would flare out about that much. and then it just joins the neckline as it is. And when you attach the collar later, the collar always attaches right up to the center front if you have a full roll collar, and the rest of this all folds back in place. So this is kind of standard, and you decide how much you flare it according to what the fashion is this year. Sometimes it's really grossly, actually, exaggerated. Remember some of those things back in the 70s? They'd come way out here and you'd have these big wide lapels. Okay, some of them were like that. Sometimes in fashion they are very skimpy and just barely come out, but you can flare whatever you want to according to how the fashion is going this year. So that's another easy one that you can do. Now what gets a little bit more complicated in this as you do these front necklines is when you do something that's a little unusual. Now back here on the mannequins, you can see the purple one. First, I'm going to show you how. I saw this blouse in a store or maybe in a magazine, don't remember now, but I thought, isn't that neat? Now, I wonder how they did that. Well, without unbuttoning it, because of course in a magazine, what can you do? But in a store also, if you see it in an expensive store, you can't go around examining them too closely or they'll wonder what you're doing there with their clothing. If you just do a lot of examining, they'll think, aha, this is not a buyer, this is a sewer, and you have to be careful about that. Okay, well anyway, I could see that we have that little cascade opening in the front, and how are we going to do that? Now, I didn't really change the left side very much. It is pretty much standard blouse. It just comes down. All I did to the left side, really, I'll turn this over, and all I did to the left side, it comes down around the neck and just down like that. That's not really changed. What I did to the right side, though, is bring it out so that it would be, oh, maybe this much wider, and then it goes in. But I wanted it to do more than go in. I have to have this longer on the right side than the left side is in order to make that ruffle. And the way you do that is with a little bit of scissor work, because if it has to be longer, obviously you're going to have to cut it. Now, I can't just, I cut it in about, let's see, 1, 2, 3 places is how I cut it. Now you can't just cut it like this and expect anything to happen. It's still a flat piece of paper. You're going to have to cut it all the way to the opposite corner, all the way to the opposite edge. And I'll just cut this off short right here. I'll cut out the arm's eye so that it will actually open up. Not too careful about cutting it, but that's okay. So I had to cut that out so that it would, whoops, I've got too many fronts here. Okay, there you can see it better on the table, so that it would open up. There's one little ruffle. I wanted 3 though, so I had to cut it again in 2 other places. So you just go ahead and cut it 2 places more and kind of go out to the arm's eye just so that you get to the other edge of the pattern so that you can then open it up. So this is exactly what it looks like. And once it's all opened up, you just tape it on your fabric maybe, or if you want to make a complete pattern on another piece of paper, I usually would just do it like this. I usually would just put it on my fabric this way in order to save time, since it's obvious what's happening with it. I'd probably just do that, cut off the extra here that I don't want, and go ahead and cut out my fabric. And I know it's going to work. Now this one, you'd cut out single layers, of course, because the right and the left side are completely different. So this is the right side only. The left side would look like the standard and not be this way at all. Now also, this neckline is slightly raised on this blouse, and that's easy enough to do. When you raise a neckline, remember your neck has some limitations there. So if you actually want to raise it higher, you're going to have to curve it a little bit right here in order to get it higher. And once you have that little curve, then you can go ahead and make this slightly higher, and it'll be comfortable on your neck, even though it is higher than your natural neckline. You'd have to do that same thing with the back then, so that they can stitch together. Doesn't it seem easy though? It really is doable, isn't it? There's another one sitting right next to it on the other mannequin, and this one is kind of exaggerated up here at the top also, but look what's happening down here. Now I'm getting down below necklines, but I'm still dealing with the front opening. Down here, this happens the very same way. You would just, I eliminated the darts in it, but it's just a matter of, here's how you can eliminate the darts. I'll just slash over to there. Now I would actually draw some lines first, but it's just a matter of slashing like this. And then I got rid of this dart. I'll just overlap it. and get rid of the dart. There we go. And so once I have that dart out of the way and I don't have that shape, then I can just add things to the front. Now I'm not going to do this initially if I'm figuring out how to do something in full-size pattern and use all this paper. I'm going to make a little miniature one. It doesn't have to be to scale, it doesn't have to be accurate, it just gives you the idea. But on this one I have a similar thing to the purple neckline in that it just all opens this way. And once it's all open, then you simply make those loose pleats to put it back together so that it all works out. You can do that, can't you? You really can do all these things without any trouble at all if you just try it. Well, necklines can be closed and wide, open to suit your preferences, and then other parts of a garment may also open up. Next time we're going to invent some options for bridging the gap when there are openings. Come join me then.